The early modern period coincides in the history of Portugal with a very peculiar period in its history, the period when the country engaged into a maritime expansion. It is important to realize that associated with this political movement, there were many issues related with the history of knowledge and the history of science and the history of technology. And so what we try to do is to look at this very peculiar moment with a specific look. Because underlying this period, what we are witnessing is a very important technological change. The possibility of long-distance oceanic voyages. And this not only led to the exploration of new places, but to the creation of completely new mindsets about distance and about how things were coherent all throughout the Earth. So ideas about the globality of the Earth started to appear at this period. There's a long historiography on this, so people have been looking into these issues for many decades now, but we are doing a number of things which are rather new, because we are looking at how the lower strata of technicians, artisans, adjusted to these transformations. We were looking how very sensitive epistemological issues were negotiated and dealt. There is a very popular idea that these long-distance voyages in the ocean were more or less things of adventurers. To a certain extent they were, but it is important always to never underestimate that there was a lot of preparation. So the preparation was logistical, technical, political, etc., but it was also technological. The structures, institutions that started to assemble and be created around these voyages to take care of the technical problems, this is also a topic that interests us very much. And not only the institutions and not only the people, but also the artifacts, the materials, the instruments, the maps. This is a process about which we have some information, but there's still a lot that remains to be made.
I want to start our conversation with a question. What is a rutter? One widely accepted definition describes the rutter as a technical navigational tool employed by pilots to navigate from one point A to another B. It included information about maritime routes, navigational hazards, astronomical observations, plants, birds, coastal landmarks. In rutters, we acknowledge that Portuguese navigators did not see fantastical animals and monsters as were included in books of natural history made in Central Europe. Portuguese navigators played a vital role in discovering nature. The genre of oceanic rutters evolved by blending various types of texts, such as geographical treatises, atlases, historical narratives, logbooks, and occasionally even linguistic dictionaries. The story takes an intriguing turn as we observe many learned authors incorporating the rutter style into their literary works, elevating it to a powerful and universal linguistic feature. Rutters were modified and tailored to constantly incorporate updated information. The concept of authorship often faded into the background. At CIUHCT, one of the projects investigates rutters under the umbrella of a European Research Council Advanced Grant, headed by Enrique Leitão. What sets oceanic rutters apart is their unparalleled circulation. Oceanic rutters found their way into the hands of diverse audiences. Right from their early stages, these rutters not only transcended the boundaries of traditional textual genres, but also reached beyond the confines of professional nautical circles, captivating a broader audience. Rutter have fallen into the hands of diplomats, merchants, religious orders, soldiers, and interestingly also female readers. It's astonishing how this highly technical and specialized textual genre reached across various social strata, contributing to the creation of a global understanding of the Earth, as never before was done.
During medieval times, European seafarers were used to sail in the small seas, like the Mediterranean or the North Seas, and so they had nautical techniques adapted to this kind of navigations. The two main parameters for navigating were the ramps, the courses, which were observed on the nautical compass, and also the estimation of distances. By using these parameters, they were able to mark the position of their ships on the nautical chart. The problem is that it's not like spectacularly accurate, so there is always a small amount of error when you do estimation of distances. This is okay when you're sailing in a small sea, but when you're sailing for a long time and you fail your measurement for a bunch of degrees, that could result in people dying, in goods being lost to the sea. They noticed that they needed another parameters and another kind of like an intellectual tools to sail in that kind of situation. They thought about the latitude, they thought about the stars, because you know when you're in the middle of the oceans, the only thing you see all around is just the sea and the sky. They started to talk to astronomers and they learned how to calculate latitude. Another problem they had to solve is that the instruments that astronomers used for calculating latitude were complex. So we have here, for example, the astrolabes. This is a planispheric astrolabe. Portuguese astronomers and pilots, what they did was just simplifying the planispheric astrolabe into the nautical astrolabe. This kind of instrument gives you the possibility to make this simple operation, which was calculating the height of the sun. And using this technique, they could mark the position of their ships on nautical charts in a much more accurate way. We usually think that when a technological loop happens, it's always by making more complicated an instrument. But actually sometimes it's just the opposite. It's by simplifying the object that we need to use. You're sailing in the open seas and you're going to spend at least a couple of months sailing in the ocean. It's good to calculate your latitude position not only during the day but also during the night. So what pilots noticed was that the polar star could be used also for that purpose. If you were using the nautical compass in latitude measurements, your nautical charts had to be constructed by using those parameters. And there's an harmony in these technological systems.
A nautical chart is kind of like a map, but it's designed with the interests of navigation at sea. And the information expressed on a nautical chart about the geography, the shape of the lands, how the continents relate to each other, it's taken from data brought by mariners on ships, and it's organized in a way that it can be useful for voyaging, for voyage planning, and for finding your way at sea. So that's why we have on charts all of these strange lines. These actually represent the different directions on a magnetic compass that sailors would have used on their ships. One of the difficulties with researching nautical cartography is about the dispersal of nautical charts and the problems they present with digitization. Moreover, even when you do have digitizations from libraries, they can be difficult to find, and you can't really make easily direct comparisons and reconstruct the history of this type of cartography. So as part of the European Research Council, Project Medea Chart, we decided to create a database both for people who are curious and for the scholarly population that brings all of these charts together in one place so that more serious comparative research can be done and more people can learn about these documents. You can search by area, time period, author, archive, all of this. At the present, our database has several thousand charts. You can get quite lost in there in a good way. I can tell you about one finding that I made in my research. I was just browsing through some charts on the database and I saw one with very peculiar little marks and circles on it. And I went to my colleague on the project, Dr. Joaquin Alves Gaspar. I showed him, he used to be a captain in the Navy, and he said these are navigational fixes. This was people on a ship in the 16th century figuring out how to get around the Cape of Good Hope. Not only was I able to make this finding and study it, I was also, thanks to the database, able to find more charts by this anonymous Portuguese author that no one had paid much attention to, and we would never have made these sort of connections. If we could bring all of these charts together in one place and make it open source and user-friendly, that historians, not just of nautical cartography, could start to investigate them and could see a bigger picture of the material culture of their period of study. The more famous examples are the so-called Miller Atlas, which is a beautiful atlas with extremely fine miniature paintings throughout. Or the planispheres of Diogo Ribeiro that are decorated with pictures of navigational instruments. Some of them are so richly artistic. There was very little substantive research done. So my focus is reconstructing the workshop practices of these artisans who are in this world between art and science.
By this time, when the Portuguese arrived in the Indian Ocean has already been a very important highway for the pilgrimage to Mecca. This really altered the texture of navigation in the Western and Northwestern Indian Ocean. We find in the writings, maybe for the first time really, a great corpus, a written witness of this immemorial and very hybrid and very intercultural tradition of navigation. And this is what makes it so valuable, and this is why we put so much time into studying this. And this is the tradition of knowledge that was met by the first Portuguese expedition that reached India. In a great moment of the history of the transmission of knowledge, the head of the Portuguese Armada, Vasco da Gama, met a very humble pilot that was lent to him by a ruler on the east coast of Africa. He interrogated the pilot. You know, he had to check if the pilot knew anything. He was going to entrust his safety to this pilot. And then the journal says, and the admiral was very satisfied with the knowledge of the pilot. And I always find this is a beautiful moment in the history of science, when two great traditions of navigation met. On the one side, you have the Iberian tradition, where a state-sponsored machinery of navigation had developed, where you had these very strict codes of conduct. On the other hand, you had this completely independent tradition, almost like a guild of navigators of the Indian Ocean, where you had the transmission from master to disciple of a body of knowledge, and was not part of a secrecy because of economical reasons. It was not a thing of industrial espionage as it was in Iberia. One of the pieces of evidence in the notes found on the margins made by different users through the decades We understand now this very clearly, how the manuscripts are enriched by these different accumulated layers of knowledge. And what we're doing at the CIUHCT is focusing on this encounter and the mutual benefit, the two traditions of knowledge, and leaving aside for a moment the political turmoil and the horrors of the military developments. And in this sense, the history of science is always an optimistic view of history, because people of knowledge are bent on sharing.
Our idea is that the development of science in Europe was a very multicultural event, where different cultures, different traditions, different countries all came into play. And the strength of the European scientific tradition, in a sense, lies in this enormous variety. So what we try to do is to add this voice and these contributions that came mostly from Iberia, because we claim that this was one of the many voices that led to the construction of science in Europe. And I think in this sense it is very important, the work that we are doing here. By adding this type of contributions, which many times were not considered in today's historiography, we do picture a development which is more varied, more colorful, more complex, but also in a sense more intense. And I think we clarify many things. And the final aspect that I would comment as a sort of consequence of all of this is the epistemological optimism that grew historically out of this, when all of these people involved acquired a sense of immense capacity for progress. And this is very clear in the sentence of a very famous man called Garcia de Horta, when he said, "What we do not know today, we will know tomorrow." I think this is a good summary of what we're trying to understand.